to another episode of the Wagging Tails podcast. Today we are going to be looking at living in an urban environment with your dogs. We're going to be looking at navigating city life. We're going to be looking at how to find appropriate areas for them, what the difference is between dog-friendly and undog-friendly. We're even going to comment on some things that are supposedly dog-friendly, which aren't actually. We're going to be addressing common behavioural issues and whether or not you have lived in the city with dogs your whole life or you're just moved to a city with a dog. I promise you this episode is going to be worthwhile. So, first of all, we're going to look at what impacts dogs in a city or a large town. So, although cities and large towns are vibrant, they're full of life, for our dogs, they have some unique challenges. It's got a high population density, there's constant noise, there's limited green spaces, it's very fast paced. It can really impact your dog's behaviour, their health, and their overall well-being. A lot of this boils down to being in a stressful and an unnatural environment.
Exactly. So dogs do need more socialization when it comes to living in cities. They need more early socialization. A lot of dogs that grow up with a lot of space to them, they don't really require as much compared to those that stay in cities, because cities, there's a different approach, right? So rural versus urban. The things that we're going to be talking about is things to do with training your dog for cities or large towns, how to care for your dog, and a lot of the key factors that will influence all these dogs that live in cities.
So before we do that, we are going to look at some of the potential drawbacks. And it's not that living in a city with a dog is a bad thing necessarily. It's that we've got to understand what the drawbacks are. There's drawbacks of being in a rural environment as well, but that's not what we're talking about today. Now, there was something interesting which I saw not so long ago, and it was why some cities seem to have more behavioural issues with their dogs than others. And it boiled down to something quite simple. There was a cultural element to that. So if you're living in an area where people kind of just ignore the dogs are just there. There's not very many people that are scared of dogs, not very many people going, oh, look, a dog. Nobody's making a fuss. The dogs tend to be more calm and better behaved because they're able to live their life appropriately. Whereas when you've got a lot of people that are scared of dogs or dislike dogs or make a big fuss of dogs, this is a lot more stress, and that can actually be a big impact as well. And I just was reading about that not long ago, so I thought I'd share that before we cracked on. But that's part of the environmental stimuli. One of the other big aspects that is very, very apparent when you start living in a city, for a lot of people that have lived in cities their whole life, you might not notice this, but for me, having lived in rural environment and then moving to a city, I certainly did. And that's the constant noise. It's never quiet, ever. Yep. You know, even if I go out at 2 a.m, and I live in a fairly, I guess you would call it a quiet area of Singapore. You know, it's not quite up north in Seletar, but, you know, it's fairly quiet. And even so, 2 a.m, I go out, I'm going to hear traffic. I'm going to hear potential sirens. You know, during the day, you're going to hear construction. You're going to hear a lot of people. There's loud sounds just happening randomly. All of a sudden, you hear a truck going past or a big boom from construction. And all of this can be very stressful for our dogs because nobody's explained to our dogs what those noises are. You know, folk are like, oh, for goodness sake, it's just construction. Well, the dog doesn't know that. That's why they're scared. So this is also a big part of it. You've also got the environmental aspect of noise pollution from certain areas. Where we are in Singapore, for example, we get a lot of thunder. So we get a lot of dogs that have been living elsewhere. They've moved into Singapore and their behavior's totally changed because not only are they dealing with all of the issues of being in the city, they're also dealing with a much, much higher rate of thunder and lightning, which can be terrifying for a lot of dogs. So basically, those are naturally going to make the dog more anxious, especially if they've not been properly desensitized to this stimuli.
There's also things to consider about your environment, like air quality, right? So urban areas tend to have poorer air quality because there's a lot of vehicles, there's a lot of factories, there's in the case of Singapore, neighboring countries that have haze being blown into Singapore as well. So think about your breed of dogs. So those people with like bulldogs or pugs, you know, they can get even more affected by all of these kind of pollution. It will make it worse for their breathing problems, which they already have. It gets worse, and your dog in general will have there will be an impact on their overall health.
The next thing to look at is even if you've got a small residence in like a rural area, they don't tend to be that small, you know? Whereas where you are in a city, a lot of the time it's really quite limited space. And apartments are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You know, there's a reason that we bought there's a reason we bought a new apartment to rent out, but we rent an old apartment. It's just because the old apartments are far bigger. So because apartment living, if you're living in an apartment, is so restricting, it can make it more difficult for your dogs to expend their energy. Um, it means that they don't get to go outside by themselves. They're always relying on being on a leash. Even if you go to a dog park, a lot of dog parks are quite small. They effectively turn into doggy fight clubs sometimes. It's an issue that we need to be looking at. And even so, even if you can get your dog outside more, because you've got a small space inside, if we've got days and days and days of poor weather, it is meaning that you're going to have that big challenge of how to keep your dog engaged. And that's going to be an issue as well when it comes to the limited space living in a city.
It's just like our rainy seasons over here in Singapore. So when it hits that, there could be like 2 or 3 days that, unless you can stay awake for 24 hours, you know, you're not going to find a window of opportunity to bring your dogs for a walk. But fret not, because there's always other things that you can do at home indoors with your dog to help with their physical or mental needs. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to talk about is the access to greenery, you know, and exercise, because parks and green spaces, it's very important for a dog's well-being, both physically and mentally. There's a lot of de-stressing exercises that dogs do by themselves when they go to places like this. They need to be able to chill, take in their environment. Like basically for them, it's unwinding. So urban areas may have limited access to places like this, or even if you do have one, it's always crowded, and then you find it hard to find a like an off-peak time whereby it's enough space to walk around without bumping into someone, you know. It's also harder to find places that are safer or cleaner for dogs to run and play off leash, which we've discussed this many times, and I would always say that dogs need to be able to run around off leash to let off some of that energy, to just be a dog basically. And the sad part is like that's not going to happen for a lot of dogs. And I'm not planning to tell everyone like, oh, go out, just let your dog off leash. No, please do the right training first before you think about things like that, and then find the appropriate places to allow your dogs to run about and explore.
See, and this then brings us to social interactions, because you've got limited green space, you've got limited parks, things like that. So you're going to be coming across a lot of other dogs and a lot of other people. And a lot of those other people have not put the effort into training their dogs. They seem to think that, for example, their dog running up to another dog and being super excited and happy, they think that's appropriate. It's not. In fact, that can create a lot of dog fights. And folk are like, oh, well, my dog was just being friendly. Well, no, your dog was being inappropriate, actually. You know, if I ran up and gave you a massive hug in the street and I didn't know you, you're probably not going to be overly happy. And that's exactly what's happening there. So for some dogs, although this can be exciting and enriching, for others, it can be incredibly overwhelming and it can actually flood them and give them phobias of being around other dogs, of being around people. So this is when it comes to appropriate socialization and correct training. It's just essential to manage these encounters effectively and ensure that you're doing the best to help your dog. So just when we're talking about this, even though you're looking at where you can take your dog with regards to getting them engaged and socializing them and things like that, you've got to be aware that not everybody is on the same page as you. Because a lot of people think it's okay to hurt their dog to show their dog that they're doing the wrong thing. Well, if you punched me every time you wanted me not to do something, it's going to make me kind of annoyed. And more than likely, I'll lash out at someone. Dogs are the same. So I don't want my dog to be socializing around those other dogs and people because it's gonna create issues and potential dog fights as well. So we've got to manage these encounters effectively.
Definitely. Also, the next thing that you should be thinking about is what are the policies for dog-friendly places? Because you have not everywhere will be, not every place or every restaurant or every cafe or every park will be dog-friendly. So you as a dog owner, you must navigate a lot of restrictions to find the right options for your dogs. Like if I want to I used to be able to bring my dogs for a good walk or a run around the park, and then there was a bar there and I could just sit down and have a beer right after that. I know it's counterproductive, but you know, it gives both the girls some time to unwind, and they really loved it there. But it closed down, and then now they open up a restaurant, and that restaurant is not pet friendly anymore. So everybody has to start figuring out little things in their routine to help their dogs.
And the thing is that some of these places that say they're pet friendly are not actually that pet friendly.
Yeah.
You know, like I've gone to bars and cafes and it says, "Oh, we're pet friendly," and I'll go to sit down and they'll say, "Oh, I'm really sorry, sir, but we only allow small dogs."
Yeah, that's
And
being
I'm like,
doggist.
"Well, that's not right. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm confident to say that my boys are better behaved than a lot of small dogs." Um, but then there's other places that are incredibly dog friendly. So you've just got to know your places and know where to go. But again, I used to do the same. I would take the boys a run through the jungle, and at the end of it, we would go to one of the bars, and then that bar's changed hands and ended up not being very pet friendly, which was a bit of a bit of a pain in the butt,
Pain.
to be honest.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, sorry, Fraser. Also, for those in Singapore, there's a difference between a place that is pet friendly and a place that allows pets. These two things are completely different. One requires a license, the other, they're just saying it is. So be aware of these two things, because
hmm.
I haven't come across this before, whereby like the licensing people come down and check whether you actually have a pet friendly license or not. But they could. That's all I'm saying. They could, and then like the restaurant will probably get in trouble. You might not get in trouble, I don't think, because like you're not doing anything wrong. If the establishment allows you to bring your dogs. But I think the licensing is more to do about if they're pet friendly, they're allowed to serve food to the dogs, I want to say. But if they don't have that license, they're not allowed to. That means like, ABS or SFA has deemed that it is that their kitchen can cook food to serve dogs, things like that. They're doing the right things, like, because there's a different level of cleaning involved when you run a pet friendly place. You have to meet a different criteria.
Interesting. I did not know that. I knew there was
Yeah,
licensings, but I didn't know that was the way that it went.
yeah,
Okay, one of the big next things that we've got to think about is health and safety of our dogs. So one thing that we've got here is the climate of the actual country, right? So we live in a hot country. I'm watching things back home at the moment, and they're saying, "Oh, the heat waves, this," and it is hot for people that are there. Trust me, it really is. But when I look at the heat that we get here, it makes me realize how much hotter it is here. And even when you're looking at like the weather forecast of a country which isn't just a city, you can see the differences between the temperatures outside of the city versus inside of the city. So, as well as the climate that you're actually in, you've got to think along the lines of the cities are heat hotspots. They're hotter than rural areas. There's an abundance of concrete. There's a lack of vegetation, which is very, very risky for dogs when it's very hot. And if you're in an environment where you get the seasons, you've got to think about that during the summer, and you've also got to think about the cold during the winter. But that's a topic for another podcast, I think. For that
yeah.
matter, heat would be another one for another podcast, I guess.
That's
Um,
true. That's true.
But you do need to think about heat stroke, dehydration. These are real issues when it comes to dogs being in cities because you don't think about it because you're not down on their level where it's radiating off of the ground. There's paved areas and concrete everywhere. These can be really, really red hot. It's if you can put your hand on the concrete during like the peak of the day and you feel that, that's what it's like on their paws. So you've got to be aware of that.
Yeah, it actually can. And I think you've caught me doing this a couple of times, right? I just put my hand on the pavement before walking a dog with it. And if you can't keep it there for, I can't remember how long it was, like 6, 7 seconds or something like that. Not just lightly pressing the ground, like you really press into the ground. If you can't keep your hand on that for whatever number of seconds, your dog can't handle it either. So it's not fair for them. Think about the different floorings as well.
The
Um,
reason Jay doesn't know the number of seconds is because what he does is he takes his shoes and socks off and just walks around like a dog for a while. It's a very effective way of checking.
How else would you check?
Exactly, yeah.
Right. So the next thing to think about is all the hazards and risk. We see this in Singapore way too many times. There's a busy street, a traffic, there's cars is a big thing, right? And as much as people obey the speed limits here, if your dog
Do
suddenly
they?
dashes onto a street, I'm just saying, air quotes for those listening. Singapore's a great place, guys.
As somebody that drives here every single day, yeah. Moving along.
Could be worse, could be worse. Anyway, so all these traffic is a potential risk for your dog, because if your dog's not well trained, they run off onto the street, onto the road, and then a car comes by, and then that's it. So please be very careful of that. It's a whole different thing to consider. Whereas like back on your farm in Scotland, you can let your dog off leash. They could run for 10 minutes in one direction and not hit a single road, kind of thing. They just go into more and more jungles and trees, and might see
There's,
another farm or something.
there's no jungles in Scotland.
Okay. More nature. How about that? More nature.
But
There's
again,
also,
this just what we were saying earlier. We were saying about the risks of urban environments as well as rural environments. If that were to happen and your dog was to run 10 minutes in one direction in the countryside, chances are your dog's going to come across a different farm's field.
yeah,
And if there's livestock in that field, the farmer has complete legal right to shoot your dog for being in the field with their livestock.
yep, yep. That's
So
something.
that's a serious something.
Yeah,
And it's an understandable one because that dog could really kill, and many dogs have killed livestock. Um, so then you've got the whole conundrum of which animal's life is
yeah, yeah.
more. And there, go down that road would be a very long one. But it's interesting, just when we were saying earlier about the pros and cons of both. So there is that. But it really boils down to one big thing with what you were saying there, Jay. With all of that, it comes down to training, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely.
If your dog's walking properly, you don't need to worry about them running out on
Dashing
the
off.
street. If
Yeah.
your dog understands the thresholds and boundaries of the home, they're not going to run outside and run onto a road. You know, if
Yep.
they're walking in the street and they see a chicken bone and they've been well trained, they're not going to try and steal that chicken bone, or at the very least, you're going to be able to get it off them easily. For
Yep.
that, for that point, why is there so many chicken bones everywhere here?
Yep. So that's the next thing,
Everywhere.
right? So people busier streets tend to have shit like this all over. You know, it's just everywhere. You have people. And okay, for those of you not in Singapore, you guys probably have heard before that Singapore's a very clean country, so on and so forth. But
And
then
it
there are still
is.
locations. Yeah, comparatively, it is. It is to a lot of other countries. It is very clean. It is very safe. But that doesn't mean that your dog doesn't need to be trained in things like this. Don't think that, oh, it's such a clean country that I don't have to worry about it. No, that your dog still needs to be trained, because I've heard of dogs choking on chicken bones, dogs trying to sniff rat poison and stuff like that, which is a shit thing over here, by the way. Like, the town council puts these signs that are so low to the ground, they think that the bloody dogs can read them or something like that. It's the signs are for the dogs. It's right on the ground and it's the size of my palm. And then they say red something here, red treatment here, or borrow treatment here, or something like that. They should put it higher up for us to see so that we can get our dogs away. This is so
Yeah.
dumb. I can tell I'm annoyed by that, but yeah. There's also people throwing, not as bad nowadays, but then I believe this would have been a bigger issue back then, whereby a lot of canned drinks or bottled drinks were made of glass back then. People would just toss it away. Then there'd be broken glass everywhere. And then that's dangerous for a dog because they don't know what it is. They would just walk. Or if they are running already, they would just run across it. And then if they injure their paw, my goodness, that's a huge problem. Like,
Oh
your
yeah.
dog starts to limp, and then you might not be able to see the cut or you might see blood, but it's everywhere, and then you will panic because you have no clue where it's coming from. You're like, oh, is it up the arm, on the paw, from the nails, or things like that? Their
It,
paws
go,
can
it,
bleed a lot.
it goes everywhere. I mean, Athos, once we were out in the field and we were just running around, and he started bleeding, and he basically got a bit of glass stuck right in between his toes. It was absolutely horrific, and it didn't stop bleeding for ages. I ended up having to use the clotting powder to
Yeah,
stop it.
yeah.
But yeah,
And it's good to have. Yeah, for sure.
so right, guys. I mean, it sounds like we're just going on about all the negatives here, but really all this is to understand the factors and understand what it actually means to have a dog in an urban environment, and being aware of the unique challenges that is posed by living in the city. And so that you can take a proactive approach to ensure that your dog can live a happy and healthy and well-adjusted life. Because whether you want to acknowledge this or not, stress is a massive killer for dogs and people. My boy Buddy, who uh, who lived the majority of his life in the countryside, he lived to like 18 and a half years old, you
Ooh.
know, but it was because he didn't have that much stress. I mean, he lived out in the middle of nowhere most of his life, you know,
Mhm.
whereas a lot of the dogs that live in the cities, they don't get that opportunity, especially if they've lived in shelters or lived in a very chaotic home environment as well as being in a city. So this is why we're talking about this. So let's talk about navigating the living in a city with the dog, and what sort of tips we can give you guys to help with the likes of crowded streets, high-rise apartments, city living, the like demands of work and things like that, how to do care and dog training and things like that. So Jay, you crack on
Yep.
first.
So the number one thing that everyone has to think about is your routine. What kind of structure do you have in your daily routine with your dog? So when I first got Blue and Ori, the first thing I tried to establish with them is a very consistent routine. So like roughly the same time every day for walks, roughly the same time every day for food and for playtime and training. So all of this creates a sense of security for your dog because they know what to expect next. You go through this often enough every day, they'll start to have a body clock of their own. They know when it's time for walks, when it's time for feeding, when it's time for play, when it's time for training, or whatever other activities that you might have for your dog. So establish this consistent routine and stick to it as much as possible. We have talked about variety in routine before, but I'm not going to go down that road at the moment. So this is what you guys need to focus on. If your dog is reactive as well, or is under a lot of stress, doesn't really like walks, one thing that you have to try your best to do is walk them early in the morning or later in the evening at night. So it's just less crowded, right? So you, with less triggers around, there's less things for your dogs to be stressed about. And if your dog is less stressed on a walk, you are less stressed on a walk. That's how it works. For a
Yeah.
lot of people out there, I will say this now, this is how it works. If your dog is less stressed, you are less stressed. You go through training, you stick to consistent training, what happens is you will be less stressed and then your dog will be less stressed. But that's after you build the bond with your dog.
So, I mean, I'll be very honest with everybody here. I do not enjoy crowds at all. Like I'm just not, I don't enjoy being in a crowd. It's funny actually, because I can be presenting to a large audience and it won't bother me, but I couldn't be in the audience, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Like, I think it's a spatial thing. But for that reason, if I go out for walks during the day and it's very busy with the dogs, I can tell them getting a little bit more anxious. And these guys have all been trained to a fairly good level, but it's my anxiety of being out in a busy street that's getting to them. So I take my boys out for 3 walks a day. There'll be morning and late afternoon, but then the evening one's the big one when nobody's around.
Yep.
Because
I'm
because
so
I,
used to walking my girls at 2 a.m. Like past midnight, honestly.
yeah, I mean, I'm maybe not quite that bad, but yeah, like it's just because I feel calmer, the dogs feel calmer. So keep that in mind, that the routine and structure is not just for your dog, it can help you as well. Now,
Yep.
with that said, there are going to be times when you're going to be out in busy streets. So safety first, you've got to take that into account. And this is where we get a lot of the big dogs, you know, the hard men, starting to talk about slip leashes and things like that. Look, yes, a slip leash might stop your dog from getting away, but it will also effectively hang them if they're pulling. So once your dog has been, I mean, don't get me wrong, slip leashes have their place. Effectively, a slip leash is effectively like a pair of flip flops, you know? Um, if you don't have any shoes to put on and all you've got is a pair of flip flops, it's safer to have them on your feet than nothing at all. So whether that
Yeah.
means going into a spa, so some groomers will insist on using a slip leash for the safety of the dog and themselves. Fair enough, you know, saves them messing around with the harnesses and things like that. If you're rescuing a dog or the dog has just been rescued and not gone through any training or behavioral rehabilitation, yes, a slip leash is definitely the way to go there. However, when you are training, when you're moving forward with things, I always recommend a dual clip harness. Now, here's the caveat here. This is when the big dogs, you know, the hard men that try and argue their point, say dogs can slip out of a harness. Yeah, they can. You're right. They absolutely can. If you're not handling the leash properly, they absolutely can.
Yep.
So learn how to handle the leash, number 1. Number 2, it's quite a simple little rig up. Martingale collar attached to the harness. The leash is attached to the harness. It means if the dog slips out of the harness, the martingale will then engage, stopping the dog from escaping.
Yep.
There's nothing complicated about that. So You do not need to do training with a device which can also be used to hang someone.
Mhm.
And I know that's maybe a triggering thing, but you know what? It should be. It should be triggering. Using a device that can hang a human or a dog or someone else as a training tool should be a triggering aspect. So, not to go down that road too deep, sorry about that. I kind of went off on a little rant there, but it is one of these things. But you need to make sure that you've got a secure harness, you've got the correct setup. Have that if you're worried about your dog being a flight risk. Martingale attached to the harness with the leash on. Your dog's not going to be able to escape from that, even if they slip out of the harness. Keep your dog safe. Prevent accidents in busy streets. You've got to teach your dog basic training. And when I say basic, I mean sit, stay, heel, come, touch, redirections. I'm not talking about like sit and paw, roll over, play dead. It's got to
That's
be utilitarian training, stuff that's useful to
Yep.
keep your dog safe, to communicate with your dog. This is the only way for you to navigate crowded areas safely without going under great stress.
Yeah, exactly. There's also things about noises that you have to slowly desensitize your dog to. This is all part of socialization. If you're in a big city, there's so many different noises for your dog to hear. And then if they're in an apartment, they can't even see what those noises are. This causes a lot of stress. Imagine if you've never heard a construction site before in your life, and then I put you in a room next to a construction site. How are you going to act? You're going to be stressed out because you have no idea what's going on. It sounds like it's bloody Vietnam over there. You know, all the noises, the banging, the loud sudden noises constantly throughout a certain time. This
But
causes a lot.
full disclaimer, guys, Vietnam's actually very peaceful now, and it's actually a really nice place to go visit. I think Jay's just been watching too many movies.
Watching too many World War movies. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, so
Vietnam wasn't part of the whole.
oh no,
Never,
not World War.
never mind. Let's move on from
So
that, Jay.
it's also very important to have somewhere at home that you allocate to your dog where they can de-stress. So this particular place can be anywhere. It could be right by the living room sofa, it could be right by your bed, could be in your study, it could be by the front door. Who knows? You can choose the place and then make sure it is your dog's safe space. So if your dog feels stressed, they go there, they chill out, and they don't get disturbed. This really helps the dog start to call a home, call your home their home.
Now, I'm going to share a little bit of a personal experience here, but I'm also going to afterwards I'll share a client experience, which is a little bit more relevant because the dog Buddy I was speaking about previously. When I was at university in Glasgow, Buddy came up to me quite a few times just to spend some time with me up in the city. Now, Glasgow's not a big city; it's not a huge city comparatively to a lot of the cities around. And initially, he was quite anxious with the noises and the randomness of things. And at the time, I kind of just thought, oh, it's just normal because he's coming from the country. But if I had known what was actually going on, I could have gradually exposed him to that and used appropriate reinforcement to ensure that he was fine.
Yeah.
But luckily, as I say, Buddy wasn't there long term. He still lived down with my mum. I was a student at the time, so it was more just up and down. But yeah, more relevantly, we've had clients moving from the likes of Switzerland or Australia, and they've been out in the country areas, and then they've moved to Singapore, and their dogs start to freak out. And that's because of the stark change. And it's not a small city, it's a big city. It's very loud, it's very hot. And this is when everything we're speaking about here is incredibly important. And even when you reach out for professional help, which I would advise a lot of people do when they're doing this, you've got to be consistent. You can't expect just being told what to do will magically fix the situation. You've got to put the effort in, or else it won't do anything. It's the same as going to the gym and listening to the PT talking for half an hour, but not bothering to do any of the exercise. You're not going to get any of the results, so it's something that's very, very important when you look at this sort of stuff.
Yep.
But that's kind of the thing, is actually putting in things into practice. So let's look at some things that are a little bit more helpful. Okay. One of the biggest challenges I find for myself and other dog owners in cities is finding suitable green spaces, as we spoke about earlier. Now, you've got to be aware of the laws in wherever you are. So some people might not know this. Jay, you might not know this either.
What?
Right. The rules here, for example, are if it's a if it's a nature reserve, dogs are not allowed in there, even on leash.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot take your dog into a nature reserve.
Yeah.
If it's a nature park, you can take them on leash into those areas. Now, that's one of the things that's very very useful here in Singapore. But a lot of folk don't realise that, and they've ended up getting fined fairly heavily. So, like, correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, but McRitchie is a reserve.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know a lot of people that have said, oh, we're going to go a nice walk with the dogs around McRitchie. Cool. If you can get away with that 2 or 3 times, that's fine. But the moment one of those end parks officers sees you with your dog at McRitchie, you're going to get fined. And I've heard of a lot of people getting fined for that.
Yeah.
So that's just one example. I mean, the one okay, hands up. I didn't know this at one stage. Kind of wandered into Bukittima Nature Reserve. And luckily for me, it was actually one of the nature reserve rangers that saw me. And he came up and he was like, mate, I don't know if you know this, but you're not allowed to have dogs in here. And I just apologized, turned around and left, which was very lucky, because I do believe if that was an M Parks officer, they would just fine you.
Depending on the individual, but yeah, they can. They definitely can.
They definitely can. They've got the right to. So it's things like that. You've got to make sure that the areas that you're in are actually dog friendly, as we were saying.
Yeah. So to find all these dog friendly places, you just need to go online. It's so easy nowadays. You just need to research a little bit, search for local parks with designated dog areas. A lot of every park in the world should have like a website for it, if I'm not mistaken. Websites or like a community page for all these parks. They usually will list if it's dog friendly or not. You can also find groups on social medias, and then they will let you know where are the best places to bring your dogs, because that's what people do. I walk with my girls around. I suddenly look at this place. I'm like, not bad. This place would actually do really well. I should bring my girls here and stuff like that. Oh, I should let other people know of this place. It's also very important to take note that for those of you who don't know, you can open up Google Maps and just search for dog park.
Yeah.
And you'll get one. Just search for dog park near me, dog run near me, whatever it's called in your country as well. It's very easy to find one nowadays. It's just depending on whether you can get your dog there within walking distance or not.
Absolutely. Well, one other thing about that is when you mention about joining the groups, for folks here in Singapore, for example, I know like the Singapore Specials groups, really good for that. Singapore Dog Community is very good for that. There's some dog communities that aren't so great for that. They're a little bit biased about things, a little bit elitist, but generally people are generally good, and if you go on and ask questions, they'll help you the best they can. You've got to take advantage of the off leash areas that you can go to when it's quiet, when it's not too busy, because you don't know when it's going to get too busy, and then it might be too much for your dog, or you for that matter. and follow the rules. I know this sounds ridiculous, but you've got to follow the rules and the etiquette to make sure that everybody has a good experience. You know, that we all want our dogs to get the best. So you hear me saying this so many times: socialize your dog properly, train your dog properly, conduct yourself properly, follow appropriate etiquette. Now,
Yeah.
this goes for dog parks and areas where you're not allowed to, sorry, dog parks and countries and areas where you're not allowed to have them off leash outside, or places like beaches or trails where you're allowed to have them off leash going through wherever in different areas. You've got to have the proper etiquette. And I know I've done a video on off leash etiquette before when I was
Mhm.
over in Scotland, and I saw a lot of people not having very good etiquette, and I kind of had a video to talk about that. But it's so important, and I've seen so many times people just being weird about things, and there's no need, you know? So, like, if your dog starts getting overly boisterous with another dog and it makes that dog uncomfortable, recall your dog and put them on the leash. Yes, you might want your dog to keep playing. We get that. But your dog was making another dog uncomfortable. Let's not start a situation. You
Yeah.
know, some of these places have got big dog and small dog play areas. Some of them have got separated play areas. If you've got that, switch area. You know, don't end up having a full blown argument in a dog park or in a nature park or wherever. You know, it's just not worth it. So
It's definitely
follow
not.
the rules, keep good etiquette, keep a cool head, and everybody will be much happier. And more to the point, your dog will be happier, because if you're stressed, your dog will also get stressed.
Definitely, definitely. So when when exploring all of these places that is dog friendly or that welcomes dogs, it's a very good exercise for your dogs because there's so much exploration for your dog to do. It's like a kid at Toys R Us for them. You know, they find these new places with all these new sounds, smells, and sights. You can you can really desensitize, not desensitize, sorry, de-stress your dog by helping them explore new areas. But of course, only after you've done the right training, the right uh socialization, and ensuring that your dog doesn't get too stressed out about walks, because there are still a lot of dogs out there who don't see the joy in a walk, which is quite sad, honestly, because that's what
Mm-hmm.
they live and breathe, you know. If your dog has issues going on a walk, please consult a professional. Your dog should not be just cooped up at home. That's not how a dog should live. They really need all of these places. You can use apps as well. I'm not very familiar with the apps. Fraser, you care to talk more about the apps?
I mean, there's loads of different apps all over the world. Some of the apps are like All Trails or Bring Fido. Um, there's other ones out there as well that basically that tell you about good dog walks. Um, so yeah, you can use some of them if you want. I think they're pretty handy in certain areas. So yeah, worth a try. Okay,
Definitely.
right. What we want to talk about just for a little bit, we're not going to go too heavy into this because we've spoken about this a lot on other podcasts, but a lot of the time, because of the urban environments, there's a lot of different behavioral challenges, from things like excessive barking, leash reactivity, separation anxiety. These are a lot more common in cities than they are in more quiet areas where the dogs have got more enrichment. So before we talk about anything at all, a lot of the problems that people have in cities can be solved through ensuring that your dog has appropriate mental and appropriate physical enrichment. Now, let's look at the more simple solutions for the likes of excessive barking, Jay.
Right. So if your dog is barking, they're basically telling you that there's something there, you know, that's what dogs have been trained to do. A lot of dogs will bark at things when someone walks past your house, or maybe you ordered some food. Don't worry about it. figure out what your dog is barking at, because your dog is just trying to communicate with you. There's nothing wrong. So once you figured out the trigger, you can work on desensitizing your dog to the trigger or counter conditioning your dog to the trigger. Don't think of it as, oh, my dog barks, it's so annoying. Because if you think of it that way, guess what? Your dog's not gonna get any better. Secondly, don't bark along with your dog. And when I say bark along with your dog, I mean don't shout at your dog to stop barking. Because to your dog, that's all you're doing. All you're doing is barking. You need to be able to teach your dog the right cues and alternative behaviors to barking. So like if there's someone at the door, both Blue and Ori, they will bark. They'll do like 2 or 3 barks and then they'll come and look for me because that's the alternative behavior that I taught them. And it's not something that you can do overnight. Trust me. You have to set it up so that your dog hears the trigger or notices the trigger. You offer your dog from a distance, do you want to keep barking or do you want to treat instead? And then trust me, if your dog doesn't want to treat, that means they're too close to the trigger, or you've presented a trigger at too high a stress level, like you knocked on the door too hard, or you just have to knock on it very softly, or knock on it softly and then be with your dog at the other end of the house, furthest away from where the trigger is. So also, excessive barking can come in the form of boredom. Sometimes dogs don't get enough of their enrichment or mental stimulation. So you need to be able to have all these things done with your dog so that they don't feel bored. It reduces a lot of boredom-related barking. There is also safe zones that we can teach your dog. If your dog is anxiety barking at a door, like stress barking because they're scared of what might come through the door, you need to provide them safe zones. And this is all about boundary and bit work with your dog. Teach your dog that this place is very safe for you. Whatever comes through that door will never harm you. So you can just go to your safe space instead of barking.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff that you spoke about there also works for the likes of leash reactivity. Dogs with leash reactivity, it works the same way. There's a trigger. You've got to identify what that trigger is and use counter conditioning, which is effectively what Jay explained with regards to the knocking, to change your dog's response to the trigger. Without going too deep into it, how that really works is when your dog is triggered, their brain releases cortisone. When your dog is given a treat or a toy, the brain releases endorphins. If you control the stress level by altering the level of sound or the distance between your dog and the trigger, you can overwhelm the cortisone with the endorphins. Then you start building up the distance, how close you are, building up the volume, building up the duration of how close you're or how loud the trigger is going to be. And you do that slowly enough so that you're able to completely overwhelm the cortisone in your dog's brain with the endorphins from the treat or the food. Very simplified way of explaining counter conditioning there, but that's how it works. Leash reactivity is the exact same. Figure out the trigger, counter condition it. You've also got to make sure that when you're dealing with leash reactivity, that your dog can actually walk on a leash properly. So teaching things like leash pressure guidance, walking with you, appropriate dog-led walks, leash skills. Your leash skills and walking skills need to be on point. Your observation skills need to be on point. All of that kind of stuff is super important. And very, very base of it all, you must start to include trust and bonding exercises between you and your dog so that your dog trusts you more and will start to look to you for advice rather than reacting themselves. So that's a very quick explanation for leash reactivity. I'm sure we've got more content online talking about leash reactivity at length, but I think we'll stop there with that one. Separation anxiety?
Yeah, so very quickly as well on separation anxiety. These are some of the most common behavior issues, like Fraser said. So separation anxiety is you need to be able to have a very positive, create a very positive association with your dog being alone. And you can't do that immediately. So you can't immediately just think, oh, you know what, I'll just toss 100 tennis balls into this room and leave my dog there for 8 hours. No, that's not how you do it. You start with small bouts of time. You disappear for 5 minutes and make sure your dog has something to work on, to be entertained with, and then you come back. Or you give them puzzle toys, you give them treat dispensers, whatever you can think of to keep your dog occupied while you're away. And when I say away, it doesn't mean like you leave the house. You could just be in the next room with the door closed. Your dog has to be able to build up this gradual confidence, self-confidence, and independence over time. It's not something that you just dump on your child, your dog. Same difference on your child.
Was that a wee bit Freudian slip there, mate?
yeah, same difference, right? So yeah, build it up, and then there's great games to build independence as well. Things like hide and seek. That's a really big one that I think everyone should start thinking about if they have separation anxiety with your dog. You get your dog to do a stay, you go hide somewhere in the house, you shout come, and then your dog searches for you. Yeah, that's a great one.
So just as a wee point, with hide and seek, it doesn't mean run away from your dog and hide. It's a sit, a stay, go and hide and recall. Because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, we play that. And then I'm like, oh, show me how you play it. And they just run away from their dog and hide. It's not really how it works. Okay, for all training, just remember consistency is key. Regular training sessions reinforce that good behavior, help solidify your dog's learning. And when you're not sure, seek professional help. And with that, we just got a question through here from Marco. My dog barks when there's a knock at the door, but once visitors enter the house, she'll pee. What should I do? Okay, so we spoke a little bit about barking there. The counter conditioning is the big aspect of that. So start off with a really light knocking on the table or the door, and then reward your dog with food or a toy, depending on how your dog responds. Then build that volume up till you're really banging on the door and your dog doesn't care, or you've got somebody at the other side of the door and the dog doesn't care. But just in the fact that your dog is no longer reacting to the door means that their stress level will be lower. Now, for the peeing aspect, that's what we call a nervous pee. So you need to start building up confidence with your dog. So confidence games will be like chaos game, having them problem solve for themselves. It's really, really important. And that could be as simple as getting an old towel, scattering their kibble in the towel, rolling it up, tying it in a knot and giving it to your dog to figure it out. They've got to problem solve how to get through that issue. That's confidence building. Hide and seek, confidence building. Scent work, getting your dog to go to bed and stay, hide some toys or treats around the house, then letting them go to try and find them. Anything that means your dog's got to think about it, got to do it themselves, will help build confidence. And then you've got then you've got exercises which are far easier. Now, I don't know if you would want to do this, Marco. Some people do, some people don't. Things like jogging with your dog. That's a primal action. It builds a very strong bond between a dog and the person jogging with them. In fact, there has been times, not overly recently, if anybody's seen my gut, but there have been times where I've been having to build a relationship with a client's dog, and I'll just take the session, and instead of sitting there trying to coax the dog into trusting me, I'll take the dog out for a run.
Yeah.
You know, and the difference it makes is unbelievable. You know, in fact, even today, and admittedly, it wasn't really a run because, you know, but I was seeing a dog, a Goose, he's a lovely dog, but he's very, very, very nervous. And I was doing a lot of confidence building stuff with him. And it was as simple as getting him to climb over logs. We were down at East Coast Park where there's like log steps and like bridges and like narrow walkways and things like that have got like a 1 foot drop and things like that. I was getting him doing them, like coaxing him up and helping him to get through it. That's massive bonding, massive trust building, massive confidence boosting. So although that seems like it's got nothing to do with your dog peeing when people enter the house, it will really help that kind of stuff is really, really important. But as I say, on top of that, Marco, counter conditioning, you can do both the door knocking. Once the door knocking's done, you can then start to do counter conditioning with guests coming into the house. Have your dog at the other side of the room. When the door opens and he sees the guest, then you can start doing the same counter conditioning. If your dog's still too scared, you've got to work on other aspects before you can start doing that, or increase the distance between your dog and the guest. So I hope that helps. That kind of answers a little bit deeper into what we were just talking about as well. So I wanted to answer it while we're still on this topic. If you're having any more issues though, Marco, just do not hesitate. Reach out to us on the website. We'll be more than happy to come and visit you and have a chat and see where we can help you further. Okie doke. So, breed specific considerations. Jay touched on this before we started the podcast officially. Different breeds thrive and struggle in different environments. This can be due to their characteristics or physical attributes, what they're used to. It's just different for different people. As they used to say, different courses for different horses.
Definitely.
You know? So
I'll talk a bit more about breeds that you should consider if you stay in an apartment. There are breeds like your Frenchies, your Pugs, your Dachshunds. They're a lot smaller, obviously, but because they don't require as much exercise, they don't require as much physical stimulation compared to a lot of other breeds. That's why they're really good for apartment living in busier cities. There's also breeds that you can consider, like your Cavalier King Charles Spaniels, your Shih Tzus. They do well in cities because they've been bred to be more adaptable and have a more calm demeanor. So think about all these kind of things. Do your research depending on where you are. And I'm not saying that you have to get these if you stay in an apartment. No, it's just that these are more suited for this. You can still get other breeds that require different things compared to all the breeds that I just mentioned. But think about all the different challenges, which I think Fraser is going to talk about.
yeah, so there's breeds that struggle. We've already mentioned this multiple times, multiple podcasts, multiple videos. Dogs like Border Collies, Australian Shepherds, Huskies. These guys are high energy. They need a lot of energy. Like, you can have these dogs in cities if you're a very, very committed owner. There's one guy that follows us. I'm not even sure if he's watching right now or not, but if he is, I promise I'm not just blowing smoke. This is genuine. Sean's got a husky, and that dog is obviously a husky. He's going to want to have a load of exercise. He needs a load of interaction. He needs a lot of attention, and he gets it. But that's not every husky that's in a city. You've got to be aware of that. Border collies as well. The number of border collies I've met that are just wired to the moon in cities because they're designed to be aware of everything because that's their purpose. But we are putting them in an environment where there is so much more for them to be aware of, and that freaks them out. Okay, so that's when you look at any sort of shepherding or high pace work dog, things like Belgian Malamuts as well. Like, honestly, I question whether Belgian Malamuts should ever be pets. These guys are bred for such high levels of work that it's unbelievable. You'd have to be an incredibly committed owner to give that dog everything that it needs. So you've got to be aware of that sort of thing before you get the dog. Now, of course, even when you're in a city, some people are in the position where they might have a large house with a large garden and all of that good stuff, but most people aren't. So you've got to be aware of that. The other big one, pun not intended, but maybe it should have been, is large breeds. Great Danes, Saint Bernards, Mastiffs, all of these big, big dogs are going to struggle in cities because everything's going to feel closer. It just is. And people don't always believe that, but like coming from a big guy, that is genuinely the case. You know, my wife can walk into a room and be like, "Oh, this is okay. It's not that crowded." I walk in and I'll be like, "Oh my God, this is so crowded." You know, and that a large part of it is because I'm a larger guy. You know, and when you've got larger guys than I am, and you ask them, they find the same. So that is an aspect as well. Plus, if you're living in an apartment, these dogs will struggle a fair bit. With that said, Great Danes are notoriously confused about whether or not they are lap dogs. They're they're very good at chilling out and just being with you, but that's not all the time. You've got to put the effort in to give them what they need. Um, so there's considerations like that that we've got to look at. Now, there is one more section that we have to address,
Yeah.
and that is street dogs and rescues. Now, these guys are not a breed, whether we want to admit that or not. In Singapore, we call our street dogs and rescue mongrels Singapore specials, as if that's an actual breed. And people talk about it as if they're a breed. Oh, my Singapore special is like this. Your Singapore special will be similar. Between Jay and I, we've got 5 Singapore specials, and not one of them looks the same as each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know that they've all got slightly different personalities. That there are common traits, but those common traits are coming from the fact that they're street dogs and rescues.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if that was a Labrador that was born in the street and had to go through the same stuff. They would have very similar behavioral traits. So we've got to be aware of that. And although it's incredibly important that they are rescued, because especially here and many other places as well, the areas that these dogs used to roam free are just not being kept for them. It's been overtaken by urbanization. So it's important that these dogs are rescued and homed and cared for and looked after. So the answer is not leaving them out there, you know? So we're going to just look at that a little bit. So Jay, talk about the background a little bit. Like share the background of your girls and typically what sort of happens with these street dogs that we
Yeah.
have.
Okay. So a lot of most of your street dogs or any dog that's been on the street by themselves, strays, or have gone through multiple litters, not multiple litters, multiple generations, they are typically very resourceful. They're more resilient because life has been challenging for them, haven't they? They have to
Mm.
learn how to survive outdoors. They don't have shelter, food, or water to think about. And all these behavioral issues can pose a big issue because all these behavioral issues can pose a big issues. All these behavioral issues come from a lot of trauma or lack of socialization, or have been their stress levels are through the roof from how much stress that they have.
Or
So
genetically put in place,
yes, yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
So
exactly.
the,
So yeah, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just saying that that's an important part to understand. If there's a dog that's been through multiple generations of living on the street, that means that those multiple generations have not been captured. So it means the
Yeah,
likelihood of them being more skittish and more human aversive is higher.
yeah,
So the
yeah.
longer a dog has been out on the street and the more generations, the more likelihood of higher levels of skittishness are coming into them. It doesn't really matter what the breed mix is, it's the
Mhm.
short term genetic shaping which is doing it.
Yes, exactly. So like blue, blue is a lot more. She was a lot more reactive when I first got her compared to Ori. Blue was a lot more mouthy. She would bite out of reactivity, out of fear, out of aggression, whatever you want to call it. Her first go-to was to bite. And that's because her mum, when she was pregnant with Blue, out in the streets, had no shelter, no water, no food, pregnant with a litter of puppies. The mom was having early stages of cancer as well, which I found out. So all of this stress that the mother had passed down to the puppies, and then when she was under so much stress that even when the puppies were born and the puppies wanted to come and feed on her, she would bite them, she would snap at them because of how much stress she was having. So, and it's not like the mom's a bad dog. No, you can't think of it that way. The mom just had very challenging conditions of life.
Yeah.
So
And
think about, yeah.
a large part of that actually also comes from what we call prenatal stress. So the stress of the mother during pregnancy actually is transmitted into the fetus, and that's a survival technique. So, for example, a giraffe that's being bred in the zoo, the giraffe will give birth, and the baby might lie on the ground for like half an hour before it tries to stumble to their feet, whereas a giraffe that gives birth in the actual wild, where there's predators literally waiting for it to happen, that baby giraffe will get onto its feet within seconds of being born. You know, and that's because the natural stress hormone which has been passed on from mother to child. So that happens in the street dogs as well.
Very much so, yeah. And so, like, the difference, Ori was kept in a cage most of her life, kept in a fenced area inside an apartment, and so she's very skittish because she's never gone through the proper socialization phase. Like, everything that she comes across, she feels like it's something dangerous for her. She's nervous about things. So I had to do a lot of confidence building, a lot of independence exercises for her, a lot of what we call the words on the tip of my tongue, optimistic, to build her optimism in encountering new scenarios, new novelties, new experiences.
So actually that will lead on quite nicely. Let's just chat a little bit about caring for street dogs. So a lot of the stuff we've spoken about previous to this, it's the same sort of stuff. Provide safe and quiet spaces for them to judge, gradually build the new experiences, appropriate socialization, using positive reinforcement. Don't be an ass and try and do it other ways. These dogs have been through enough stress. Adding more stress will not help. It doesn't matter how badass you think you are, it is not the way forward. Patience and consistency are key. These dogs might take longer to adapt, but it's worth the effort. You know, and eventually you end up with a bunch of lazy dogs lying around your office while you're doing a podcast.
Sleeping on a sofa, or he's sleeping on my bed.
Although when I said lazy, Porthos looked at me like, "What did you say?"
I'm not lazy. Throw a ball. I dare you.
There's no way I'm not touching a ball. But one thing I noticed that was quite interesting about Ori is Ori stayed with us a few times when Jay's been traveling, and she does take some time getting used to novelty. She doesn't freak out, but she gets anxious about it. And because she was going from going a walk with Just Blue, Jay's done amazing work with Blue, but Blue's also quite high energy and very like ultra aware and things like that. And she's also quite a bit younger than at least two of my boys. I think she's the same age as Barthos.
A year younger, I think.
A year younger.
Yeah.
So like Athos is considerably older, and Ori was now walking with all three of those dogs and me. And one thing I noticed is within 2 or 3 days of her staying with us, she just stopped caring about a lot of the novelty.
Yeah.
She was like,
behavior.
Yeah, learn behavior. That social learning was incredibly important. And it wasn't, you know, to be honest, I even saw what she was doing, and it was looking at Athos and Aramis. You know, even when it came down, so one thing that Ori used to have, which Jay's nipped in the bud nicely, is food reactivity.
Resource guarding.
Yeah, resource guarding. And Ori was staying in the office where I'm recording this, and the boys were outside. But they were all being fed all in a line. There was just a gate between Ori and the other boys. And I gradually was working on that with Ori as well, just to help Jay out while he was away.
Thank you.
And one thing I did notice is the one time the gate wasn't closed, Athos wandered into the room And Ori growled for like half a second, looked up, saw Athos, and then just stopped and continued eating.
Yeah.
So it
She's
wasn't,
just communicating.
yeah, she was communicating, realized that Athos couldn't have cared less about her food.
Mhm.
He was coming in to kind of just see what was going on
Yeah.
because it's his house. He can do what he wants,
Exactly.
And it was a very nice interaction to see. And I think that was a big impact for her. And I think for rescue dogs, that peer-to-peer learning is very important for all dogs, but for rescue dogs in particular, it can be incredibly impactful.
Yeah.
I think we'll have another episode on rescue dogs because we'll talk about that way too long.
Yeah, that's going to be a 3-part episode, I think.
Quite possibly. Well, to be honest, what I would quite like to do is for rescue dogs, I would like to try and get somebody from N Parks that's part of the trap neuter release. I'd like to
Program.
get somebody who works quite high end with one of the AWGs and get somebody who's on the ground that's actually doing the volunteer work. And I reckon that would be a good 3-parter for that,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Definitely.
Anyway, I don't know why we're discussing that live on air.
Yeah.
Okay. To recap, guys, urban dog ownership means that you are facing unique challenges. You've got to get the right approach. City life can be rewarding for both you and your dog, but you've got to remain consistent with your routine, your training. You've got to find suitable areas for your dog. You've got to address behavioral issues properly and promptly. You've got to be proactive. You just have to be.
Definitely. Yep. So please share with us all of your experiences that you have on any of our social media pages. You can use the hashtag at hashtag Wagging Tails Podcasts. And we hope to see you for our next episode. Take care, guys.
Cool. And just before we go,
Yeah.
I just want to remind everybody, we have got 2 classes coming up. We have the puppy course, which actually starts this Sunday. Now, if your dog is below 2 years old and you're wanting to get more socialization, a better bond, better training, and all that good stuff that we talk about continuously, that's taking place on East Coast Road at Doggy Retreat every Sunday at 10 a.m. It is an 8-session course, and if you go to the website and use the discount code PUPPYPOWER, you will get a 10% discount. So for anybody listening or anybody that knows anybody with a puppy that might help, go for it. There's still spaces available. It's something that the people that have done it previously have had great results from it. So have a look at that one. On the 27th of this month, we are starting our Back to Basics, like it's the ultimate dog training course. So even if you've done training in the past with your dog and you feel like you could do with a brush up, you want your dog to be better socialized, you want your dog to be better on leash, you want your dog to be better bonded with you, to trust you more, this course is the one for you. It's a 10-session course, 2 weeks between each session so that you've got time to practice, online support for the Facebook group. And again, if you use POWER and the discount code, that's a 10% discount for that one as well. If you're listening and that's going to come in useful, please go for it. If you know somebody that might be used to, please share with them. We are here to help, and we're finding that this is a really good way of helping more people. So let us do what we love doing, guys. Yep. And with that, we will say goodbye. Join us next week for another episode of the Wagging Tails podcast. Have a good one, guys.